உள்ளதலதுள்ள உணர்வு உள்ளதோ உள்ள பொருள் உள்ளலற உள்ளத்தே உள்ளதான் உள்ளம் எனும் உள்ள பொருள் உள்ளல் எவன் உள்ளத்தே உள்ளபடி உள்ளதே உள்ளல் உணர்வாயே. Namo Ramana. With Bhagavan's immense grace, we have been meditating on the text Ulladu Narpadu. We are in verse number 11. To put it in context, we are in the first segment of Viveka, and in that we have seen that the first 4 verses are in fact a complete coverage of the whole work. Then 5, 6, 7 is on the discrimination relating to the world. 8 to 22 we have seen is discrimination relating to the pure ego or Ishvara leading to the self. So we continue our investigation with Bhagavan's Upadesham. As we had seen in verse number 9, Bhagavan had talked about இரட்டைகள் முப்புடிகள் என்றும் ஒன்று பற்றி இருப்பவா அவ்வொன்றேதென்று கருத்தினுள் கண்டால் கடலும் அவை. Bhagavan had covered the whole area of dyads and triads and said that they arise holding on to one. So if we inquire what is that one, then they all fall away. Then we saw that verse number 10, 11, 12 and 13 are going to be on the principal dyad concerning Jnana Margam, that is knowledge and ignorance. These 4 verses, the 8th verse was on எப்பெயரிட்டு எவ்வுருவிலேத்திலும் அப்பேருருவில் அப்பொருளை காண்வழியது. And we had briefly covered that from here on till verse number 22. Bhagavan is going to give various names and ask us to meditate on them, take it to the one source, which is the self. And we had said the names need not be the names of gods, but it could be names like dyads and triads. It could be names like Jnanam and Abdhyanam. So these 4 verses, verse number 10, 11, 12 and 13 are on the dyad of Jnanam and Adjnanam. So we had seen also that verse number 10 is about the basic arising of the duality of Jnanam and Adjnanam. Ariyamai vittu arivindram, அறிவு விட்டு அறியாமை என்றாம். இவ்வறிவும் அந்த அறிவும் அறியாமையும் ஆர்க்கென்று அம்முதலாம் தன்னை அறியும் அறிவே அறிவு. அறிப. So that was verse number 10, which dealt with the objective duality of Ariyamai and Arivu, knowledge and ignorance. And Bhagavan said that, as Akka said, they are almost the same thing. But for, at least for reference, we can say that they are 2 sides of the same coin. One cannot exist without the other. Ariyamai vittu arivindram, அறிவு விட்டு அறியாமை என்றோம். That was in the area of the objective duality or the suttarivu. Now Bhagavan is going to shift our attention from the objective duality to the subjective false ego rising as the root ignorance. Then if that root ignorance is the first error, then what we call as knowledge, which is known by that ego, must also now be called as ignorance. Earlier, Bhagavan had said in verse number 10 that the objective world, the objective universe can be looked at as the duality of knowledge and ignorance. Now there is a shifting of gears, so to say, that there is a shifting of attention from the object to the subject. So let us go into the verse. Arivurum tannai ariyadu, arivurum tannai ariyadayalai, arivadariamai anri, arivu arivayar kadara tannai ariya, arivariyamai arume. Arivurum tannai ariyadayalai, arivadariamai anri, arivo arivayar kadara tannai ariya, arivariyamai arume. So Bhagavan shifts the attention to Arivurum tannai ari. So the earlier verse was on the duality of the objective knowledge always arising together with objective ignorance. And now Bhagavan is going to paint that entire direction with one color. He is going to call that entire direction as ignorance, because if you don't know oneself, if you don't know the Arivurum Tang, the Arivurum Jiva, then whatever you know is painted with that ignorance. We will recall the incident before going into the verse where Bhagavan tells the scientist, because if we understand this verse, then the earlier verse is completely absorbed into this verse. And we have seen earlier, we have read from the talks that Bhagavan cautions that Maya is of such nature that it can make even the greatest of intellects to slip. Because while translating these verses in Arivu and Ariyamai, or making it the work into Sanskrit, writing it as Sanskrit verses, Bhagavan says, Ganapati Muni demurred. Ganapati Muni waited, hesitated to write that Arivum Ariyamayum Arume, that both knowledge and ignorance shall be displaced. Should we not have some amount of knowledge? This was what his contention was. And Bhagavan says, he reminded that great one, that he himself had translated the verse in Upadesha Saram, that the knowledge and ignorance are both out in the pure knowledge. The verse you have yourself translated, don't you remember? Therefore, the whole area of the so-called knowledge has to be removed because it is painted or tainted by the ignorance of who one is. Why it is so important? If we understand that, if we gather that, then the verse makes a lot of sense. And the whole practice of who am I brings a lot of meaning. So let us take that and go and revisit that incident before going into the verse itself, because that is going to put us in a perspective where we will understand how important it is to remove all the darknesses in the ego. This is the incident where the university student who has just then completed degree comes to Bhagavan. So I will read it from the work Guruvachaka Kovai, page number 88, 89 and 90. In Ulladu Narpadu, he, the narrator of the story, found phrases such as, the world is false and what exists is only one. These ideas puzzled the young man. All that he had learned at the university rose up in his mind. The nature of the atom and the universe, the wonderful and great power that was stored in them, and the means employed by scientists to harness this power for everyday use. He began to think about the big book he was reading and the academic knowledge he had acquired. I am like a tiny atom in this vast universe. Why should God create me here? Where was I before I was born? Where will I be after I die? And why should I be here now? Is not everything what I see real? Am I not aware of the existence of things through my five senses? The Maharishi says that none of these things exist. Am I not seeing the Maharishi himself sitting in front of me? Thoughts such as this churned his mind until he could no longer continue reading the book. He became lost in deep thought. The Maharishi then looked at the young man and asked, "What is your doubt?" The young man immediately sat up and, looking at the Maharishi, replied, "A form exists on the sofa and another form exists on the floor. If I open my eyes and look, two of them are clearly visible. But you are teaching that what exists is only one. How can this be true?" is the question. So, how can the truth be that oneself alone is? That there is nothing like knowledge to be acquired. The Maharishi laughed a little and then kept quiet for some time. A few minutes later, he gave the following reply. Don't you perform experiments in the laboratory when you are at the university? Let us suppose that you are researching into some topic. To whatever extent the equipment you use in the experiment is subtle and precise, to that same extent, the real nature of the things being studied will be known. Like if we use a lens, that will give us some truth about the object studied. If the same object is studied by a microscope, it will be a different and deeper level of truth, subtler truth. To whatever extent the equipment you use in the experiment is subtle and precise, to that same extent, the real nature of the things being studied will be known. But even if the equipment is highly sophisticated, if your vision is not normal, then the true nature of things being studied will not be known. Even if the vision is normal, if the brain itself is not normal, then also the true nature of the object being studied will not be known clearly. Even if the brain is normal, if the mind does not engage itself with full attention on the experiment, knowing the truth will not be possible. So ultimately, ascertaining the truth of the object of study is dependent on the mind. Then Bhagavan will take, what is the mind? The mind is nothing but a collection of different thoughts, and all the thoughts arise, depend on, and end with the I thought. That is, they arise after the I thought arises, they exist depending on the I thought, and they vanish when the I thought also subsides. So all these thoughts, the main instrument being the mind, that instrument is dependent on the instrument called I thought. So Bhagavan will say, this I thought is the instrument with which you are going to acquire various knowledge or variety of knowledge about the world. What is this I thought made of? It has two components, says Bhagavan. The I thought has two components. One is consciousness, which is eternal, imperishable, independent. The other is the body, which is temporary, dependent on food, and not self-luminous. Both combined together forms this I thought. So far as you have the element of the perishable body, which is ignorant and which is not eternal, mixed up with the consciousness, the instrument you are using is impure. The instrument that you are using to gain knowledge is impure. What you will call knowledge and what you will mark as ignorance will depend on how pure your ego is. More the impurity, more you will call ignorance as knowledge. Something like that. So Bhagavan will say all that you are going to acquire is going to depend on the nature of the instrument. That is what is the content of this verse. That before rushing out and gathering knowledge, better to study about oneself. Arivurum tannai ariyadu, ayalai arivad, ariyamai andri arivo. Is it not ignorance? Lakshman Sharma says, is it not ignorance? Rather than calling it as knowledge, is it not ignorance to rush out and try to learn about that which is other than the I, other than the ego, other than the knower, without knowing the knower, who is actually of the nature of knowing, or who is knowing the objective knowledge, without knowing the knower, trying to know the other, is actually ariyamai. So the whole area which we were saying as it is made up of the duality of knowledge and ignorance, that whole area is being painted as ajnana. To try to know the objective knowledge, all suttarivu is now being labeled as ajnanam. That is what? Before knowing about yourself. Before trying to know about yourself, if you try to know the object. Arivurum tannai ariyadu, ayalai arivadu, ariyamai andri arivo. Is it not ignorance rather than knowledge to try and know that which is the other, rather than establish knowledge about oneself, the Jivatma or the knower? Arivayar kadara tannai ariya, that which is the substrate of both knowledge and ignorance. When you know that by the enquiry, who am I? Arivariyamai arume. Going back to the verse on dyads and triads, in the verse, Bhagavan says, when you know the self, all dyads and all triads will fall away. Similarly, the dyad of knowledge and ignorance will fall away the moment you know the self. So to put both the ideas together, it is merely ignorance to try and know more and more about objective knowledge without knowing who the knower is. The moment by the enquiry one knows the support of both knowledge and ignorance, when that self is known, then both knowledge and ignorance, the dyad, they fall away. That is the import of the verse. Arivurum tannai ariyadu, ayalai arivadu, ariyamai andri arivo. Arivayarku adara tannai ariya, arivariyamai arume. Why it is so important to know the knower? Let us go to Ramayanam and see what Kamban gives us the Kadavul Varthu in Yuddha Kandam. Why it is so important to know the knower? Now the knower has the ability, with the intellect that has been given, the knower has the ability to twist knowledge as ignorance or ignorance as knowledge. So really speaking, there is no reality in knowledge or ignorance. It is totally dependent on the one who is knowing. It is totally dependent on him or her Because that is the power of the intellect that has been given. That is what Kamban says here. Kamban says, Ondre endrin ondreyam, pala endrurakkin palaveyam, andre endin andreyam, ame endin ameyam, இன்றே என்றின் இன்றேயாம் உளது என்று உரைக்கின் உளதேயாம் நன்றே நம்பி குடி வாழ்க்கை நமக்கு இங்கு என்னோ பிழைப்பு அம்மா. Kamban says that the ego has been invested. The I, which is the adhara of knowledge and ignorance, has been given this power to twist knowledge as ignorance as knowledge. And we have seen that incident where Bhagavan says, when someone accosts him as he is coming down from the hill, a devotee accosts him and says, "Oh Bhagavan, I have had your darshan, I am so happy." And Bhagavan says, "Why don't you say, you gave me darshan?" So that means in this world, the same incident can be seen from many angles. If one is taken as knowledge, then one is ignorant of all the other perspectives. So it arises together. That is what is mentioned here in this shloka by Kambar. He says, Ondre enin, and this has been taken by Kannadasan into one of his songs. One of his songs, he says, Undendral adu unde, illai என்றால் அது இல்லை. கடவுள் என்றால் கடவுள், சிலை என்றால் வெறும் சிலைதான். If you call it God, then it becomes God. If you call it merely a sculpture, it becomes merely a sculpture. If you say it is there, then all support is there for you to say God is there. If you say it is not there, then all support is there for you to say God is not there. That is how much God has invested. God has given us the freedom, and that is why the responsibility also is totally on us. Since there is freedom, with absolute freedom comes absolute responsibility. With high degree of freedom comes high degree of responsibility. When one is free, one has no right to blame another. Only when one is bound to another, one can say that person did not allow me to see. When God has allowed us the freedom to be an atheist or a total believer with equal fervor, the intellect has been empowered like that, then the responsibility to come through to jnana is also on us. Of course, God's grace becomes constant. Undendral adu unde, illai endral adu illai. If the ego wants to say God is there, God supports that. If ego wants to say God is not there, God supports that also, says Kambar. Let us go to Siva Prakasham Pillai and take some help. Siva Prakasham Pillai, avargal, in this verse, he gives us some clue as to how we divide the objective world. Of course, I hope I have communicated the importance of knowing the knower. Because all knowledge that we are going to, the moment you meet any of the people who are psychologically disturbed, it is said that many of them are very close to spiritual truth. Those who are having psychosis are supposed to be very close to spiritual truth. They are not completely free, but they are free to misunderstand. They are not the average. They don't want to go with the average society, but though the majority, 95% of people are saying something, these psychologically disturbed persons, they can view the same thing from a different twist. That freedom indicates that if you misunderstand, that could be there, whereas a slight bit of correction, you can move away from the average and be totally free also. That is why many of the modern psychologists, they find that most of these people with psychosis, they have made a lot of independent research to know the freedom of the self, but somewhere the journey is incomplete, and those small dark spots in the ego is what is to be corrected. From that angle too, this verse becomes very, very critical. The psychological problems need not be analyzed from the contents of the psychosis, But one can, if they are capable of, one can ask them to do the self-inquiry or put the attention on the eye, where the darkness in that eye, what Bhagavan calls as association with the mortal elements, is removed, so that no darkness is projected outside. But let us take Sivaprakasham Pillaival's support. Sivaprakasham Pillaival writes that உலகினை அறிகிற ஜீவனாகிய தன்னுடைய மெய்ஸ்வரூபத்தை அறியாமல் அந்நியமாய் தோன்றும் உலகை நான் எனது என்னும் அபிமானத்துடன் அறிவது விபரீத உணர்வாகிய அஞ்ஞானமே அன்றி உண்மை ஞானம் ஆகுமோ. So Sivaprakasham Pillaival gives us one more way in which we come into this area of knowledge and ignorance. Like he says, the whole world is made of objects, in which this body is also one of the objects. This whole world is made of objects, of which the body is also one of the objects. Sivaprakasham Pillaival says our knowledge begins with the first error of identifying with one of the objects of the world and calling it as non and enadu. Of course, that enadu includes enadu alladadu, that which is not mine, mine and not mine. So Sivaprakasham Pillaival's this look, I have mentioned it once earlier, that the whole of the objective world is now understood by us or approached by us by this basic division, that this body is me, the rest of it is made as mine and not mine, or this body also on inquiry will come to as mine. But this is how the error starts, error in the area of knowledge and ignorance, by taking one of the objects in the world as I now say that these are mine, and then starts the game of objective knowledge and objective ignorance. These are my friends, these are my enemies, these are good people, these are not so good people. These divisions arise after the Arivurum Tan is rising. So Sivaprakasham Pillaival says, you divide the objective world as non another. உலகை அறியும் ஜீவபோதத்திற்கும் உலகினுக்கும் ஆதாரமாக தானாகும் ஞான ஸ்வரூபத்தை அறியவே ஜீவபோதமும் அஞ்ஞானமும் அற்றுவிடும். So Sivaprakasham Pillaival has now concluded that the whole of worldly knowledge, including I am the body, is ignorance. And the moment the source of the jiva bodham, that which is rising as I, when that source, limitless source is known, then both this ajnanam, the ajnanam of I am the body, and the ajnanam of the whole world. Now there is no division of knowledge and ignorance there. That whole world is ignorance. The ignorance of I am the body and the ignorance of the whole world, both of them will vanish in the self-knowledge. Let us see a practical example of how this vanishes, how this worldly knowledge vanishes. Does this mean that one becomes completely unrelated to where one is, or one becomes disoriented? Obviously not. Bhagavan's teachings are the most practical of teachings you can find. In the last 1 week, I have had the opportunity to contact or to be in satsang with 4 different ladies who are doing 4 different kinds of work. One is, of course, working as assistant to my mother at home. She is earning some amount of money, sending it to her home, which is in Tiruvannamalai. The family is in Tiruvannamalai. Second is my daughter, who is doing the doctoral thesis and has a family to attend, and is also working in a bank, having come to the closure, almost end of her thesis work. She has taken up an assignment also. The other lady is my better half, who is employed as a newly promoted higher official in SBI, who has moved to Bombay. Yet another lady is a high ranking official, very, very high ranking official, But all the four have the same problem or the same issues to attend, whether they are in the forefront or not. All the four have the balance of work and the balance of family in their forefront. Without any difference, all the four of them, you can understand, it is so easy to understand that when they have these two different hats to wear, that of earning and that of taking care of the family. Now, the questions in their mind are, in the work also, all of them are doing important work. All of them are doing important work, and the results of those work are going to affect more than the numbers in terms of their family members. The number of people affected by their work are more than the number of people who are in their family at the moment, for all four of them. The numbers may differ, but who will be there for their family? The question for their family is, who else can come and be there? They only have to be there. So the intellect in all their cases gives the same doubt as to, am I apportioning the right amount of time for work and the right amount of time for family? And it is a very, 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 very serious doubt and serious question which each of them faces and which each of us will be facing in our day-to-day life. That am I really compromising on my family by paying too much attention to my work, or am I compromising on this important work by unnecessarily paying attention where it is not necessary, where it can be balanced there itself? Now, in all the cases, Bhagavan's teaching of Arivurum Tannai Ariyadu Ayalai Arivadu is a very, 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 very practical approach to resolving the doubtful intellect. The intellect is going to throw the doubt at all times. However much we may reason, however much we may, because I had said, what are the issues involved? The issues involved are numbers on one side, on the other side, something which you alone can do. Others cannot come and do, and you cannot ask them to come and do it for your family. You alone have to do. And that has to be balanced against something where more people are affected, and you have to balance this. And the intellect is not going to leave you. It is going to throw up doubts at the right time. When we hold our assistant back, and because Amma has to be taken care, and she has something to attend there in Tiruvannamalai, she will be in that problem. Or if she goes and stays one extra day or 2 extra days, she will have still the same problem as to where she should have concentrated or put her attention on. Same is the problem with the other 3 people. I suppose it's the same for all of us. We can extend it. But see how the knowing of the knower comes in here. That Arivurum Tannai Ariyadu Ayalai Ari. So far as you know the ayal, there is always going to be knowledge and ignorance. You never really know where you should really be, and doubt is always going to crop up. Whereas when you ask, for whom is this? Then when the attention is put on the knower, what happens? The knower dissolves in the source. The dissolves in the Nindrapurul. When the knower dissolves in the Nindrapurul, the knowledge and ignorance, whether I was right or whether I was wrong, both of them dissolve, and one is identified with the infinite. One understands that it is the infinite which apportions their time here or there, work here or there. Let me come again with Bhagavan's teachings to reinforce this, how practical it is and how practical it is necessary to identify with the infinite rather than with the ego. Let us come back again with what Bhagavan says in Ashtakam. Bhagavan says in Arunachala Ashtakam that the moment he came to Tiruvannamalai, what happened was, Arivinai Marulurut Aruginil Irka Arugurum Mamayamidu Achalama Kande. Bhagavan, what he does, the moment he comes to Tiruvannamalai, Arivinai Marulurut Aruginil Irka. He doesn't say he has come. He says that it is the hill which has drawn me. And how it has covered up my knowledge, given its knowledge and pulled me like a magnet to it. Aruginilirka Arugurum Amayam idu Achalama Kanden. I saw the movementless, the Achala, Arunachala. The next lines are the critical aspect of knowing the knower. Kandavan evanena karutinul nada, Kandavan indrida nindradu kandeen. Bhagavan says, Kandavan evanena karutinul nada. Who is the knower of division of knowledge and ignorance? How much time I should spend here? How much time I should spend there? Did I spend right amount of time there? Did I spend right amount of time here or not? When my mother asks, why you did not come at that time when I was calling for you? How to feel peace, at peace? How to not to be disturbed? When the daughter says, why were you not present for this particular function? What is it that allows you to be settled here rather than be in doubt and act out of that doubt and create more problems? What is it that allows you to be settled? It is the Kandavan Yavan. Kandavan Yavanana Karuthinul Nada. To see, inquire into who is the one who has knowledge of the two, the knowledge and ignorance. When you inquire this, Kandavan Indrida, the ego vanishes and one takes rest in the self. Nindradu Kandeen. Kandanan Endrida Karutezhavillai, Kandilan Endrida Karutezhuma. To say that I now know that it is God who is running everything, for that also the ego should not raise. To say that I don't know whether I was right or wrong, also the ego need not raise. One is merely allowed to have identity in the self. Instead of identifying with the relative ego, one starts identifying with the self. The same work will be going on, the same incidents will be going on, but the doubts, the superimposition of doubts into our work and corrupting of the work, all this which does when the knowledge is limited up to the ego. The ego is the one who knows right and wrong. The ego is the one who knows knowledge and ignorance. From there, when one starts paying attention, even while playing the role, when one starts paying the attention to Kandavan Evan, Arindavan Evan, Terindavan Evan, Nadappavan Evan, all this puts the attention on the ego and the ego starts purifying itself. Bhagavan says in one of the talks that the purified ego alone is allowed to merge in the source. It alone can be called as the self. Unless the ego is completely purified of all attachment to the ignorance, it will not be allowed to merge in the source. It will not be allowed to identify with the self. But as this journey is clearer, then even though the roles are played, even though the four ladies are playing the same roles, the identity is not with the knower who gets caught between knowledge and ignorance. And sometimes when you were certain in that moment, it was very, very sure knowledge that yes, I should spend this extra moment because the order is from the superior. So many people are involved. The whole bank is involved. So I have to spend this 1 hour. But later when the daughter questions why you did not come, there is always this doubt. When from somewhere else the call is there, why couldn't you take my call at that time? There is this doubt whether that knowledge is right or wrong, whether that knowledge is true, whether I was really ignorant there. This doubt comes from the intellect. And the very practical way for the ego to function in this area of knowledge and ignorance is to go to the source. For whom Kandavan Evan, for whom is this analysis between the knowledge and ignorance, whether I was right in spending time here or I was not right in spending time there. As we go in, we find the Ishvara, what Bhagavan says that our prarabdha prakaram adarkanavan angang irundu aativipan. As we go towards the self, we clearly understand that there is one I which distributes the thoughts, and the thoughts have to be there and they cannot be denied by the ego. The power with which the thoughts come, the ego has to surrender and act on it. Now, in the return journey, these truths are taught to the ego. As it purifies itself, it is taught where you're not compelled to act, where you're not compelled to stay back. It was so sure that you had to stay back and attend. You were so sure that you had to stay and take care of the family. So from where the thoughts come? The thoughts come from a deeper area than the ego. And as the ego starts knowing itself, it knows the truth of Bhagavan's statement, our prarabdha prakaram, adarkanavan, ஆங்காங்கு இருந்து ஆட்டி விப்பன் என்றும் நடவாதது என் முயற்சிக்கினும் நடவாது நடப்பது எந்தடை செய்யணும் இல்லாது இதுவே திண்ணம் ஆகலின் மௌனமாய் இருப்பேன் நன்று. When the thought of was I right, was I wrong, and when the question from the aggrieved party comes, can the ego remain still? Can the identity with the self not be lost? Can the scientist remain pure with the I thought, completely freed of the mortal area, completely freed of ignorance? Then, as Bhagavan says, there is only one. There is no two. The scientist and the one on the sofa and the act of seeing, that triad, the knowledge that I am the scientist, that is Bhagavan sitting on the sofa, is now replaced by the truth of aham, 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 I. It comes up, raises as the pure truth. Ahaminashabaji, aham taya, spurati hrit swayam, paramapurna sat. Bhagavan says, in the investigation into for who is the Arivurum Tan, the ego perishes, the false self perishes, and the Akanda Atma rises and shines as I continuously. This continuous I replaces all dyads, replaces all triads, and that Spurana alone is. That Spurana, identifying with this Spurana itself, is knowing the whole world. That identifying with this Purana is knowing the Jiva Bhava. Identifying with this Purana itself is knowing everything about God. There is nothing other than identifying with this Purana, I. That is why Sivaprakasham Pillaival says, the moment the Swarupa is understood, the knowledge of the Swarupa is there, both the ego, the one who was seeing, and the division or the ignorance of the worldly knowledge, both of them vanish and the Swarupa alone remains. And the suggestion to the four ladies and to all of us is identify with that, with the limitless, with the limitless source. Then the doubts and the doubter are both absorbed in the limitless source, with the knowledge that the apportioning of work, the apportioning of time is all by the one Manigalil Saradana, Uirdurum Nana, Madandurum Boruanai, Maruvinay Nida. There is an energy which ties all the beads into one garland or one necklace. It is that power which is going to guide. The outside is a connection of all the beings. In fact, this story that the outside is a collection of odd beings, all beings run by one power. That story is also a knowledge. The story that our prarabdha prakaram, adarkanavan, aangangi irundu aatti vippan, that is also a knowledge. Both these are for whom? These final apparent resting places are also now offered to the self, because they also arise as a knowledge and ignorance. Because there will always be people who will say, no, there is no such force. There is no one who is there, who is running everything. Because what did we see earlier? Kamban saying that undendraladu undu, illai endraladu illai. That much rights have been given. If you say God is there, He is kind enough to be there. If you say God is not there, He is kind enough to allow you experiment from that basis also, till we find the self finally as the one substrate of all knowledge and all ignorance. That is pure knowledge. The I is pure knowledge. That allows us rest. That allows us the Parandama Sthiti, which is beyond doubt. There is no doubt that need be had whether I could have gone there or I would have done better, or the thought that hereafter I should do like this, Hereafter, I should approach like this. All that is now absorbed in the pure knowledge of I. The whole area of knowledge and ignorance is now called ignorance. And who am I results in Swarupa. And Swarupa alone is real knowledge, which is not impinged even in the slightest by ignorance. With Bhagavan's immense grace, let us sit in practice of knowing Harivurum Tannai Harivadu. For whom is this thought? Is the just like Kandavan Evan, Bhagavan asks, Kandavan Evan ena Karuthinul Nada, Sindithavan Evan ena Karuthinul Nada Vendum. For whom is this thought? Who is seeing the thought? I. Who am I? Takes one to the Nindra Purul, to that Purul which has no doubt, which has no division as knowledge and ignorance. That knowledge, that Akanda Jnanam is our reality. With Bhagavan's immense grace, let us sit in practice till 8 o'clock. Bhagavate Sri Ramana. Namo Ramana. Namo Ramanaka.
Namo Ramana. Prostrations to Ramana, shining as the self in all beings. There's Nandakumarji. Of the explanation. Bhagavan, knowledge has got other side, the coin. It has got ignorance. This is what we saw in the verse, that knowledge and ignorance go hand in hand. They are two sides of the same coin. And here Bhagavan is taking us to the root. The root is, he says, that without knowing the I, which knows everything, through this lens, and that example was given of the science student, through this lens actually the world is being seen. If there is an error in the eyes, then no matter how good the spectacles, no matter how good the microscope, there cannot be a proper vision. If there is cataract, unless the cataract is operated, vision will not be okay. Or if there is some other error in the eye, if one is wearing, it is said, if one is wearing colored spectacles, the world will look that color. It will look pink or yellow or green depending on the colored spectacles which one is wearing. So it is like the error is here. The error is not out there. And so long as the error is here, the error outside can never be erased. That is what Bhagavan is saying. Without knowing the I, if you know anything else, it is bound to be ignorance, because it starts with the premise of ignorance. It's on the basis of ignorance that it is built. There are many examples given. It becomes illusory. All that knowledge becomes illusory. There are many examples which are traditionally given for such illusions. It is said like, it is like the horns of a rabbit, decorating the horns of a rabbit. It is like getting a barren woman's son married. It is not there. It is mythical. Supposing, you see, when I was younger, I used to write articles in the Ramana Way, our monthly journal, which is called Adventures of Mr. Ego. So what all happens, it was like a search. The ego rises. The stories would come saying the ego rises. Why does the ego rise? And how is one to tackle this ego when it rises? Such were the articles which were in the form of, it was in a story form. So, Professor K. Swaminathan, very senior devotee of Bhagavan, he told my father, "Sir, all this is fine, Sharda writes well and all that, but why is she writing Adventures of Mr. Ego? Bhagavan says there is no ego at all. There is no such thing as ego at all." So if there is an erroneous, that there is something called an ego, there is some entity called Sharda, there is a valid entity called Sharda, then everything that is seen or experienced of the world is seen only on the basis of this erroneous entity. And how can that be valid? It cannot be valid. That's why Bhagavan says, unless we question and get back to the truth of our own nature, everything else is false. And there is another beautiful incident in Bhagavan's life where he says that everything is false if you do not know who you are. We have the instance of one visitor to the ashram. He wrote a biography on Bhagavan Ramana, and that biography was completely filled with wrong facts, within quotes, or from our approach. It said that Bhagwan had got married, he had children, and whatnot. Now, that biography was written and it was handed over by that visitor to Bhagwan himself for corrections. And Bhagwan corrected the grammatical mistakes in that biography and returned it to that visitor. And finally, what happened was that visitor took it to a printing press to get it printed. And that printing press owner happened to glance at it and he felt something is not right about it. And he knew Kunju Swami. So he gave this manuscript or the first proof, the draft, to Kunju Swami to check it. And Kunju Swami came running to Bhagavan with it and said, Bhagavan, this is full of lies. இது அத்தனையும் பொய் எழுதியிருக்காங்களே. So, this is full of lies. ಇದಷ್ಟು ಸುಳ್ಳು ಇದೆಯಲ್ಲ. What to do? Then Bhagavan said, they say that, oh, அது மட்டும்தான் பொய்யோ, மற்றதெல்லாம் மெய்யோ. Is that alone falsehood? Is that alone a lie? Everything else is truth, is it? That's what Bhagavan asked. Meaning to say that the entire perception of this world is based on the false sense of I. So Bhagavan says, unless you come to know who this I is, every bit of knowledge is only ignorance. It is ignorance. It is the knowledge of the entity which is an illusion. And what happens when that source is gone? When one goes self-inquiry. See, what happens when we have a thought? We feel that we know the thought. There is a sense of knowing something. The part of the thought for us is the knowledge of the thought. That's why we don't even mind sometimes having negative thoughts, because it's something we don't do. I know this thought. And when we do not know something, we feel very worried by it. We feel afraid. In fact, this morning I had an interesting exchange with Dilip Simha. We were working on the Ramana Way magazine, and I pointed out to him, I was in the last stage of proof correction, and I told him, see, this one name has been spelt wrong in the contents page. Now Dilip said, Akka, I don't know how this error came. I don't know, and I'm afraid now. So we both had a hearty laugh. The moment we don't know something, we become afraid, because we think we know and we think we need to know. In the area of not knowing is something which we dread. The moment we think, oh, this is how the error came, we are comfortable. To the extent that sometimes, we don't even mind whether there is a solution or not. We must know. That is how attached to knowledge we are. But Bhagavan says that knowledge and ignorance both will disappear when one goes to the source of the I. And that is natural, because in the earlier verse itself, Bhagavan has told us that relative knowledge and ignorance are bound to each other. They are two. So that's the background with which we came to this verse. Bhagavan has already said that knowledge and ignorance are two sides of the same coin. If we have accepted that premise and then come to this verse, if we have accepted the premise that knowledge and ignorance are two sides of the same coin, then when ignorance goes, must knowledge also not go? It has to go. That knowledge which is relative to ignorance, which can be subject to ignorance, limitation, that knowledge has to go in the fullness of the being. That relative awareness, that relative knowledge has to go. That's why Bhagavan says Arivu and Ariyamai will both go away. So one has to accept that the transcendence, very often this happens even later when Bhagavan comes to verses on time. And everywhere we think that the transcendence is holding on to one part, holding on to the good thoughts, holding on to the knowledge, holding on to the powerful, to the peace, holding on to sweet experiences without having negative experiences. But that is not the case, because every part of a relative experience that is rooted in the ego has automatically its shadow, its opposite coming with it. It cannot be, the two cannot be separated. So relative knowledge and relative ignorance cannot be separated from each other. Ego-based knowledge is ego-based ignorance. Ego-based ignorance is ego-based knowledge. That's what Bhagavan told us. So both will go. It will go. It is a transcendence. It has nothing to do with the realm from which we are functioning at this moment. And that is in fact the gift. That is in fact the blessing. We think that what we know to be a blessing is a blessing. And that's why we wonder when Bhagavan says. In fact, even in Madurai, when we were chanting Sadhu Om Swami's Dhyana Pata is almost the last verse. He says that Jagamelam Irulmayam. Only the Arulmayam. Bhagavan alone is Arulmayam. Jagamelam Irulmayam. And Somasundaram, the very senior devotee who takes care of that, he said, why does he say Jagamelam Irulmayam? Why does he say this is darkness? There are some beautiful aspects. There is Arul also in this world. So why not say Jagamelam Arulmayam? But the world has to be ignorance. Everything in this has to be accepted as illusory, as based on the basic ignorance of the non-awareness of one's true nature. So everything stemming from that, we must be ready to surrender through the inquiry which Bhagavan has given us, that extraordinary grace of the path of inquiry which Bhagavan has given us, which we must be ready to, a weapon which we must be ready to wield on every thought, recognizing this is a thought, this is based on the fact that I am a thinker. Therefore, all the knowledge that this thought brings to me is futile. It is only amounting to ignorance. It is meaningless. So let me get back to my true nature. This is the grace, the call of grace to us this is Bhagavan's call to us, and he ensures that we will gradually listen to this call and get back to the self. Om Namo Bhagavate Sri Ramana.
Namo Ramanaka.
Namo Ramana.
Ramananjali, Ramananjali, Ramananjali.